The first time I realized I had already been erased, it wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no tears. It happened quietly, on a rainy Sunday morning, when my own company email locked me out and displayed a single sentence on the screen. Access denied. Please contact administration. I was 63 years old. My name is Marlene Whitaker, and that email account had been mine for 27 years. I stood there in my home office, coffee growing cold in my hand, listening to the soft hum of the printer that no longer recognized me. Outside, the maple trees along our Connecticut street dripped rain like a slow leak. Inside, something far more important had already broken. An hour later, my phone rang. It was my stepdaughter, Vanessa. "Oh," she said lightly when I answered. "I forgot to tell you. We made some changes this weekend." We. That word. Vanessa was 41. Sharp. Polished. The kind of woman who smiled while cutting you open. She'd joined the company 5 years earlier, after my husband Howard passed. She said she wanted to help keep his legacy alive. I believed her. That was my first mistake. "What kind of changes?" I asked. There was a pause. I could hear keyboard clicks in the background. Then her voice again, calm and professional. "The board voted. We needed fresh leadership. You're transitioning into an advisory role." I sat down slowly. "The board," I repeated. "Which board?" She laughed softly. "Marlene, don't make this harder than it needs to be. You're not excluded, just repositioned." Excluded. That word would haunt me later. Whitaker Textiles wasn't just a company, it was my life. I built it from the ground up alongside Howard, starting with 1 rented warehouse and 3 sewing machines. I handled finances, contracts, payroll. When Howard died suddenly from a stroke, people assumed I'd sell. I didn't. I worked harder. I survived. And now, without warning, I was being told to step aside. "I'll come in tomorrow," I said. "We'll talk in person." Another pause. Longer this time. "That won't be necessary," Vanessa replied. "Security has already been instructed." Security. When the call ended, my hands began to shake. Not from fear, from humiliation. From the sudden understanding that something had been happening behind my back for a long time. By the afternoon, emails started arriving. Condolences disguised as congratulations. A former client wrote, "Heard about your retirement. Wishing you peace." Retirement. I had never said that word. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house Howard and I once shared, touching familiar things. His leather chair, the framed photo from our 20th anniversary. The silence felt heavier than grief. It felt intentional. At 3 a.m, I opened the filing cabinet in my study, the one Vanessa had asked me not to worry about anymore. Inside, folders were missing. Legal documents, trust amendments. My name appeared, but the signatures looked wrong. Too smooth, too rushed. My heart began to race. I wasn't just being pushed out. I was being replaced. And whoever had done it believed I wouldn't fight back. They were wrong. The next morning, I put on my gray wool coat, the one Howard always said made me look unshakable, and drove to the office anyway. The parking lot was full. My parking spot was not. I parked across the street and walked in through the main entrance. The receptionist, a young woman I had personally hired 3 years earlier, looked up and froze. "Oh," she said. "I wasn't expecting you." I smiled politely. I wasn't expecting to be erased. "Looks like we're both surprised." She glanced toward the glass offices lining the hallway. Vanessa's door was closed. The blinds were drawn. "Is my badge still active?" I asked. She hesitated, then shook her head. "It was deactivated this morning." I nodded, calm, controlled, the way I'd learned to be when something inside me was catching fire. "Tell Vanessa I'm here," I said. Minutes passed. Then her assistant appeared, tight smile in place. "She's in a meeting," he said, "but she asked me to walk you out." Walk me out. I turned and looked at him. Really looked. He couldn't meet my eyes. "Tell her this," I said quietly. "This isn't finished." As I stepped back into the cold air, something shifted inside me. The shock gave way to clarity. I had spent decades learning contracts, loopholes, power dynamics. I knew how people stole quietly, legally, with a smile. I drove straight to my lawyer's office. Her name was Ellen Price, 60, unimpressed by theatrics. She listened without interrupting as I laid everything out. The emails, the trust documents, the board vote I'd never been invited to. When I finished, she leaned back. "They used your grief," she said, "and your trust." "And my marriage," I added. "Howard would never have allowed this." Ellen nodded. "That may be your strongest point." Over the next week, the truth began to surface. Vanessa had quietly amended the company trust, naming herself majority executor. She'd convinced 2 board members that I was emotionally unstable after Howard's death. She'd framed it as protection. Protection. That word again. Then came the final blow. Ellen called me one evening, her voice sharp. "There's a clause," she said. "A sale contingency. If you're deemed unfit to manage, the company assets can be liquidated." My chest tightened. "Liquidated to who?" "Her," Ellen replied. "She already has a buyer lined up. A private equity firm." I closed my eyes. Thanksgiving was 2 weeks away. Vanessa had insisted we host it at the company estate. Said it would be symbolic, healing. I agreed. Because by then, I knew something she didn't. While she was planning my disappearance, I was documenting everything. Emails, recordings, witness statements, even a quiet confession from one of the board members who realized too late what they'd helped do. Thanksgiving would not be a celebration. It would be a stage. And this time, I wouldn't be the one stepping aside. Thanksgiving arrived wrapped in false warmth. The estate looked beautiful that afternoon, all polished wood and autumn light spilling through tall windows. Vanessa had overseen everything personally. Floral arrangements, seating charts, even the background music. She liked control expressed in small details. I arrived early, as she expected, wearing a navy dress Howard once bought me because he said it made me look formidable. I let Vanessa kiss my cheek, let her guide me to the living room, like a guest in my own life. "You look well," she said, studying my face. "Rested." I smiled. Grief teaches endurance. Her eyes flickered, just for a second. The guests arrived slowly. Board members, their spouses, a few longtime clients, people who had watched me build Whitaker Textiles from nothing and now pretended not to see me standing on the edge of my own legacy. Dinner was served precisely at 5. Turkey, candles, crystal glasses. Vanessa took the head of the table without asking. No one objected. Halfway through the meal, she stood and tapped her glass. "I want to thank everyone," she began, "for supporting the next chapter of this company. Change is hard, especially when emotions are involved. But sometimes, leadership means knowing when to let go." I felt eyes shift toward me. Pity, relief, discomfort. I folded my napkin carefully. "Before we move on," I said, standing slowly, "I'd like to say something too." Vanessa's smile froze. "Marlene, maybe later." "No," I said gently. "Now." The room stilled. "For decades," I continued, "this company was my responsibility. I carried it through recessions, expansions, and personal loss. I trusted the people at this table, especially family." I looked directly at Vanessa. "Recently, decisions were made in my name that I did not authorize. Documents were signed when I was grieving, isolated, and deliberately misinformed." Vanessa laughed, sharp and brittle. "This isn't appropriate." "It's very appropriate," I replied. "Because as of this morning, those decisions are under legal review." Murmurs spread. Chairs shifted. I reached into my purse and placed a folder on the table. Copies of trust amendments. Email chains. Time-stamped recordings. "I suggest," I said, "that anyone involved speak to their lawyers." Vanessa's face drained of color. "This is manipulation," she snapped. "You're confused." I met her gaze. "Then I look forward to proving otherwise in court." I sat down. Conversation did not resume. One by one, guests made excuses and left. The estate emptied quickly once illusion cracked. Vanessa stood rigid at the head of the table, hands clenched. "You think this scares me?" she hissed when we were alone. "I know it does," I replied, "because you rushed." That night, I drove home through quiet streets, heart steady. My phone buzzed with a message from Ellen. "Judge-approved temporary injunction. Asset freeze in effect." I smiled. The trap had closed. But this was only the beginning. The following weeks were a study in pressure. Vanessa's lawyers moved fast. Motions, Counterclaims, allegations about my mental health slipped quietly into filings, wrapped in professional language meant to sound compassionate. Ellen dismantled them methodically. "They're trying to exhaust you," she said. "Make you doubt yourself." I laughed softly. They underestimate how tired I already was. The first hearing was scheduled for early December. Until then, Whitaker Textiles was frozen in legal limbo. No sale, no restructuring, no public announcements. Vanessa did not handle stillness well. She called, left messages, swung between rage and pleading. "You're destroying everything Howard built," she said in one voicemail. I deleted it. Then came the workplace betrayal I hadn't anticipated. My operations director, Mark Reynolds, someone I'd trusted for 15 years, testified that Vanessa had been acting CEO for months, that I had been checked out. I listened to the transcript in Ellen's office, hands folded. "Did he believe that?" I asked. "No," Ellen replied. "He believed what benefited him." That night, alone in my bedroom, the emotional wound finally surfaced. Not anger, not fear, grief, not just for Howard, but for the version of myself that believed loyalty grew naturally with time. The hearing arrived cold and gray. I sat at the plaintiff's table, spine straight, listening as lawyers argued over my life like inventory. Vanessa avoided my eyes. Then Ellen called her first witness, a former board member, retired, quiet. He described how Vanessa had framed me as unstable, how she'd pushed documents across the table and said, "This is for her own good." Protection, again. Next came the forensic accountant. He explained how funds had been moved in preparation for sale, how Vanessa had positioned herself to inherit everything once I was legally sidelined. The judge listened carefully. Then I was called to testify. I told the truth. Slowly, clearly, about grief, about trust, about waking up one morning to find my life reassigned without consent. Vanessa's attorney tried to rattle me. "Isn't it true," he said, "that you were emotionally compromised after your husband's death?" "Yes," I replied. "Grief is not incompetence." The judge looked up. When the hearing ended, the ruling was brief. Temporary control restored to me. Independent oversight appointed. Vanessa barred from executive decisions pending trial. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. Vanessa stormed past me, face twisted with fury. "This isn't over," she said. I nodded. "No. Now it's honest." That evening, as I sat in my living room, I allowed myself one deep breath. The tension had shifted. The fight was no longer about survival. It was about consequences, and I was ready to see it through. Control changes the air in a room. When I returned to Whitaker Textiles as interim executive, escorted by a court-appointed auditor, people stood straighter. Conversations stopped when I passed. Fear replaced arrogance. Not because I raised my voice or made threats, but because truth had entered a space built on manipulation. Vanessa was still employed. Temporarily. The judge had insisted. I insisted she be moved to a windowless office on the 3rd floor. No authority, no assistance, no access to financial systems. The first time our eyes met across the hallway, she smiled thinly. "You think you've won," she said. "I think you revealed yourself," I replied. "Winning comes later." What unsettled me most was not her anger, but how many people avoided meeting my gaze. People who had known exactly what was happening. People who chose comfort over conscience. Mark Reynolds was one of them. I asked him into my office on a Tuesday morning. He sat stiffly, hands folded, pretending calm. "You testified against me," I said. "No accusation, just fact." "I told the truth as I saw it," he replied. "No," I said quietly. "You told the truth as it served you." His jaw tightened. "You approved fund transfers without my authorization," I continued. "You attended meetings I was excluded from. And you stayed silent." "I was protecting the company," he said. I leaned forward. "You were protecting yourself." Silence stretched between us. Then I slid a folder across the desk. "This is your resignation agreement," I said. "Sign it, and I won't pursue charges." His hands trembled as he reached for the pen. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call. From Vanessa's mother, Howard's first wife. Her name was Linda. "I didn't know," she said. "About the documents. About the way Vanessa pushed." I closed my eyes. "You raised her," I said gently. You knew who she was. There was a long pause. Yes, Linda admitted. I just hoped she wouldn't turn it on you. Hope, I had learned, was often an excuse. By Christmas, the company had stabilized. Clients returned. The board shifted. 2 members quietly resigned. One asked to meet me privately. I should have spoken up, he said. I was afraid. I know, I replied. That's why this happened. Christmas Eve arrived cold and bright. Snow dusted the sidewalks. I spent it alone, by choice. Vanessa did not call. But something else arrived instead. A courier envelope. No return address. Inside were copies of emails I had never seen. Vanessa communicating with the private equity firm months earlier, promising a smooth transition, referring to me as an obstacle. One line froze my breath. Once she's legally deemed unfit, it will be clean. I forwarded everything to Ellen. Her reply came seconds later. This changes everything. Criminal intent. That night, I sat by the window, watching snow fall, feeling the weight of years lift slowly from my chest. They had underestimated not just my strength, they had underestimated my patience. The criminal investigation began quietly. No announcements, no dramatic arrests, just subpoenas, interviews, paper trails unraveling. Vanessa grew pale. She stopped wearing heels. Her confidence eroded in layers. She avoided common spaces, spoke only through lawyers. One morning, she appeared in my office doorway, eyes rimmed red. Call it off, she said. We can settle. I studied her, truly studied her. The ambition, the entitlement, the belief that blood entitled her to ownership. You wanted everything, I said, including my silence. Her voice cracked. You're my family. I stood. Family does not erase someone while smiling. She left without another word. The investigation uncovered more than fraud. It uncovered infidelity. Vanessa had been using company funds to support a relationship with the private equity firm's lead negotiator. Gifts, travel, hotels charged as business expenses. Karma, I learned, was rarely subtle. The trial was scheduled for late spring. By then, the story had leaked. Not all of it, just enough. Headlines spoke of betrayal, of a widow fighting back, of a company saved from internal sabotage. Women wrote to me, strangers, older women who recognized the quiet violence of being dismissed. On the stand, Vanessa unraveled. She denied nothing, just justified everything. I did what was necessary, she said. She was old, emotional. She would have ruined it. The judge listened without expression. When my turn came, I spoke without anger. I was never afraid of losing power, I said. I was afraid of losing dignity. The verdict came quickly. Fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, embezzlement. Vanessa was sentenced to prison. Not long, but long enough. As she was led away, she looked back at me once. Not with hatred, with disbelief. She still did not understand. After the sentencing, I walked alone through the city, past offices, past people rushing toward futures they believed were guaranteed. I returned to Whitaker Textiles, not as a survivor, but as a woman reborn. I sold the company 6 months later, on my terms, to employees, to people who remembered where it came from. On the final day, I cleared my office, took only one thing, Howard's photo. At home that night, I sat in silence, peaceful silence. Revenge had not consumed me. Justice had freed me. And for the first time since Howard died, I slept without fear of waking up erased. Freedom has an echo. After the sale finalized, people expected me to disappear, to retreat into a quiet retirement, to soften, to forgive. That expectation followed me like a shadow, but it no longer had power. I had learned something vital during the trial and its aftermath. When a woman survives betrayal and refuses to shrink, the world grows uncomfortable. I moved out of Connecticut in early summer, not out of fear, but intention. I bought a modest house on the Oregon coast, where the mornings smelled of salt and pine, and the nights were honest in their silence. No company emails, no board meetings, just the steady rhythm of waves and the sound of my own breath returning to normal. That peace did not last long. 3 weeks after the move, Ellen called. Marlene, she said, careful with her tone, there's something you need to know. I sat on the porch, wrapped in a sweater, watching fog roll in. Vanessa has filed an appeal. I closed my eyes. On what grounds? She's claiming undue influence, that you manipulated the investigation out of spite. I laughed, a short sound without humor. Of course she is. There's more, Ellen continued. She named you personally in a civil suit. Emotional damages, loss of inheritance. Inheritance. That word again, as if it were oxygen. Does she have a case? I asked. No, Ellen said firmly. But she has time. And bitterness. I thanked her and hung up. That afternoon, I walked along the beach until my shoes filled with sand. I thought about all the women I'd heard from. Mothers excluded from wills, grandmothers pushed aside, widows erased by younger hands that believed age was weakness. Vanessa was not an anomaly. She was a symptom. The appeal process moved slowly, but it reopened something inside me I had hoped was finished. Not fear, resolve. A deeper one. I reached out to a woman named Clara Jensen. She had written to me months earlier after reading about the trial. She was a former journalist, now retired, with a reputation for investigative precision. What would you do, I asked her over the phone, if you wanted to make sure the truth could never be buried again? She didn't hesitate. I'd tell it publicly. On your terms. Within weeks, we began working together, not on a memoir, on a record. Emails. Depositions, financial documents, a timeline of how betrayal unfolds when no one intervenes, how favoritism masquerades as concern, how manipulation thrives in silence. We did not name Vanessa. We did not have to. When the series was published online, it spread quietly at first, then faster. Women recognized patterns. Men recognized consequences. Vanessa's appeal was denied 3 months later. Her civil suit was dismissed, and something else happened that surprised me. I felt nothing. No triumph. No relief. Just clarity. Revenge had been a chapter, not the ending, and I was no longer defined by what was taken from me. The letter arrived in late autumn. No return address. Prison stationery. I knew who it was from before I opened it. Vanessa's handwriting was neat, controlled, the way she always tried to appear. She wrote about time. About reflection, about regret. She wrote that prison had stripped away illusions, that she finally understood the damage she had caused, that she wanted forgiveness. I read it once, then again, slowly. Forgiveness is a complicated word. People use it like a demand, like a shortcut to absolution. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Weeks passed. The ocean grew rougher. Storms battered the coast. I spent my days walking, reading, speaking with women who had found their way to me through the series. One evening, as rain lashed the windows, I realized something essential. Forgiveness was never owed. It was optional. I wrote Vanessa back. 1 page, careful, honest. I wrote that I acknowledged her words, that I believed she was finally facing herself, that I hoped she would use her time to understand accountability, not just consequence. But I did not forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And that was not cruelty. That was truth. I mailed the letter and felt lighter for it. In December, I was invited to speak at a small conference for women over 50. No stage lights, no grand introductions. Just a room full of women who had lived long enough to know betrayal rarely announces itself. I told them this. Justice is not about destroying someone who hurt you. It's about refusing to let their actions define the rest of your life. Afterward, a woman with silver hair and tired eyes took my hand. Thank you, she said. I thought it was too late for me. I squeezed her hand. It never is. As winter settled in, I returned to the beach each morning. I watched the tide erase footprints. I learned to let things pass without carrying them. The story that began with exclusion had ended with reclamation. Not just of a company, of myself. And if you've been listening to this story, if you've recognized yourself in the quiet moments, the overlooked signs, the slow burn of injustice, then I want you to know this. Your voice still matters. Your story is not over. If this resonated with you, take a moment to like this story, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe. There are more truths waiting to be told, and none of us should have to tell them alone. The call came from a number I didn't recognize, just after dawn. I almost ignored it. I had learned that peace often depends on what you don't answer. But something in me stirred, the same instinct that once told me to open a filing cabinet no one wanted me to see. "This is Marlene," I said. "Mrs. Whitaker," a male voice replied, cautious, measured. "My name is Thomas Keene. I'm a federal investigator. I was hoping we could speak." The words federal investigator have a way of pulling the air out of a room. "I'm listening," I said. He explained slowly. The Nessa's case, he said, had triggered a broader review. Not just her actions, but the firm she planned to sell Whitaker textiles to. Shell companies, offshore accounts, a pattern of targeting family-run businesses led by older owners, particularly widows. She wasn't the architect, he said. She was a participant. I closed my eyes. "How many others?" I asked. "More than we're comfortable with," he answered. He asked if I would be willing to testify again. Not about my company, about the pattern, about how manipulation works when it wears the mask of concern. I said yes. Not because I wanted more confrontation, but because silence had already cost too much. Weeks later, I found myself back on the East Coast, sitting in a quiet federal building that smelled like paper and old coffee. I told my story again, but this time it was different. It wasn't personal. It was structural. How age is used as evidence. How grief becomes a liability. How women are slowly excluded from decisions until exclusion feels normal. Thomas listened without interrupting. When I finished, he slid a file across the table. Inside were photographs, names, familiar strategies. One name made my stomach tighten. Mark Reynolds, my former operations director. He resurfaced, Thomas said. Different company, same role, same behavior. Betrayal, I learned, rarely retires. It just relocates. That night, in my hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the city lights. I thought about how close I had come to disappearing quietly, how easily this machine could have swallowed me whole, and how many women hadn't made it out. The investigation moved quickly after that. Subpoenas, raids, arrests that didn't make headlines, but changed lives. Then came the request I hadn't expected. "We'd like you to speak," Thomas said during our final meeting. "Publicly. Not about the case, about awareness." I hesitated. "I'm not a crusader," I said. He nodded. "You're a survivor. That's more powerful." The event was scheduled for early spring. A modest auditorium. No sponsors. Just stories. As I stood backstage waiting to walk out, I felt something unfamiliar. Not fear. Responsibility. Because once you know the truth, you can't unknow it. And once you speak it, there's no going back. The room was full before I reached the podium. Women of every age, but mostly older. Some alone, some holding hands. I recognized the look in their eyes. The one that comes from living long enough to be underestimated repeatedly. I didn't prepare remarks. I spoke the way I always had. Plainly. Honestly. I wasn't targeted because I was weak, I began. I was targeted because I was alone, and people assumed no one would notice if I disappeared. The room went still. I told them about the slow erosion, the subtle exclusions, the way betrayal often arrives disguised as help. When I finished, there was no applause, just quiet. The good kind, the kind that means something landed where it needed to. Afterward, women lined up to speak with me. Stories poured out. Sisters who rewrote wills, sons who took over businesses, co-workers who decided a woman over 60 was expendable. One woman stayed behind after everyone left. She introduced herself as Ruth, 72, former partner in a manufacturing firm she helped build. "They did it to me too," she said softly. "But I didn't fight. I thought I was tired." I took her hands. "You weren't tired," I said. "You were worn down." That night, back at the hotel, I received another letter. Vanessa again. Shorter this time. "I hear you're speaking now. I suppose this is your victory lap." I read it twice. Then I smiled. I didn't write back. The next morning, Thomas called. "They're offering a deal," he said. "If she cooperates fully, her sentence could be reduced." "And if she doesn't?" I asked. "She serves it all." I thought of the letter, of her tone, of how even now she framed accountability as something happening to her, not because of her. That's her choice, I said. When I returned to Oregon, the ocean greeted me with familiar indifference. Waves don't care about justice. They just keep moving. I walked the beach at dusk, letting the wind strip away the last of the tension I'd been carrying. I realized then that the final twist of this story wasn't what happened to Vanessa. It was what happened to me. I had stopped living defensively, stopped waiting for permission, stopped fearing that speaking would cost me peace, because peace built on silence was never peace at all. And as the sky darkened and the tide rolled in, I knew the final chapters of my life would be written on my terms, not erased, not edited, chosen. And that, more than revenge, was the justice I had earned. The letter came in late summer, tucked between a gardening catalog and a utility bill. No official seal this time, no legal language, just handwriting I recognized instantly. Vanessa. I hadn't heard from her in months. After the offer of a reduced sentence, she had gone silent. I assumed she had made her choice. The letter was shorter than the others. No apologies, no justifications. I watched your speech online, she wrote. Not the whole thing, just enough. I waited for the familiar tightening in my chest. It didn't come. She continued, You said you weren't targeted because you were weak, that you were targeted because you were alone. I never thought of it that way. I thought I was rescuing something that was slipping away. I almost laughed. Almost. Then the last lines. I've agreed to cooperate fully. Not for you, for myself. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I finally understand that what I did wasn't ambition. It was fear. I folded the letter slowly. Fear wears many disguises. Love, protection, even responsibility. I had learned that lesson too late, but not too late to live with it honestly. I placed the letter back in the envelope and put it in the drawer with the others. Not as evidence, as history. A week later, Thomas called to confirm what I already suspected. Vanessa's cooperation had expanded the investigation significantly. Charges were filed against several executives. Restitution funds were established for victims. You played a larger role than you realize, he said. I just refused to disappear, I replied. That autumn, I was invited to serve on the advisory board of a nonprofit focused on financial abuse against older adults. I accepted with one condition. No figurehead roles, I said. If I'm in, I work. The work was quiet, methodical, reviewing cases, speaking with women who had been excluded, manipulated, sidelined, helping them rebuild, paper by paper, boundary by boundary. Some days were heavy. Others felt almost sacred. One afternoon, as I walked home from the coast trail, I realized something startling. I was no longer angry, not numb, not resigned, free. The betrayal no longer defined the shape of my days. It had become a chapter, important, painful, finished. That night, I stood on my porch watching the sun dip into the ocean, painting the water copper and gold. I felt older and stronger for it. Age had not made me invisible. It had made me undeniable. I turned 65 in silence. No party, no announcements. Just a long walk along the beach at sunrise, the sand cool beneath my feet, the horizon wide and forgiving. I carried no bitterness with me that morning, only perspective. I thought about the woman I had been when this story began. Still capable, still sharp, but unaware of how quickly the world tries to rewrite women once they pass a certain age. We are told to soften, to step back, to make room. I had learned that making room should never require erasing yourself. The nonprofit hosted its first annual retreat that fall. A small group, 12 women, different stories, same pattern. Exclusion disguised as care. Betrayal wrapped in family language. On the final evening, we sat together in a circle, candles flickering. One woman asked me the question I knew would come. If you could go back, she said, would you do anything differently? I thought for a long moment. Yes, I said. I would have trusted my discomfort sooner. I would have asked harder questions. I would have believed that love and accountability are not opposites. She nodded, tears in her eyes. Another woman spoke. Do you think revenge is wrong? I shook my head. Revenge is about punishment, I said. What I chose was justice. And justice is about restoration, of truth, of dignity, of self. That night, alone in my room, I opened the drawer one last time and removed all the letters. I read them again, not with pain, but with distance. Then I placed them in a box and sealed it. Some chapters don't need revisiting. Now, when I wake each morning, I do so without fear of being excluded from my own life. I choose where I go, what I give, what I protect. And if you're listening to this story and feeling that quiet recognition, that tightening in your chest that says, this could have been me, hear this clearly. It's not too late to reclaim your voice. It's not selfish to protect what you built, and you do not owe your silence to anyone. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like it so more women can find it. Share your thoughts or your own experience in the comments. And subscribe if you want more stories about betrayal, justice, and the power that comes from refusing to be erased. Because these stories matter, and so do you.